The best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! As a tier list. Today, I'm going to be ranking some of the most popular strategies in Yu-Gi-Oh! From the best decks available all the way down to a real challenge. My guy, I got my Joey Wheeler shirt on. Look at it. Look at it. I'm made for that real challenge. And right before we jump into this video, big dog, I have to announce something really special to me. I'm actually going to be donating to Toys for Tots this year, and I have a way that you can help. If you go to duelingguard.com and use my code CALI5, I'm actually going to be donating 100% of my cut to Toys for Tots. I really want to make something awesome. So again, if you want to go ahead and get some amazing product while also helping out a great cause, I'm giving you away. Let's jump on in. Okay, big dog, the criteria for this tier list, simple. I'm going to be ranking these decks on how powerful they are. And of course, I'm going to take into consideration what happened over the course of the weekend. YCS Bologna was crazy. Bologna, Italy. And I also included every single strategy that you guys mentioned in the last tier list. Be sure to comment on the pinned comment if you want to see a particular deck. Let's go ahead and start off with Branded. This deck actually did really well. I would say that Branded is easily a solid choice Yu-Gi-Oh deck. One thing that I will say about Branded players is that they figured out how to play around Ash. The problem with this is that Super Star Slayer Sky Crisis completely obliterates this deck. It prevents Mirror Jade from being activated and it gets rid of the card. It stops Guardian Chimera. Whoa, that's a whole nother problem. Regardless how you look at it though, Branded is a solid choice Yu-Gi-Oh deck that has climbed itself back into contention as a powerful deck. Centurion! Centurion is the new kid on the block, big dogs. This deck has came in scorching hot. I'm gonna say solid choice. The biggest draw for Centurion is that it can perform its entire combo with one card. That means that the rest of your cards in your hand can be literally anything. Though the drawback that I've been noticing about this deck is that it's not really hard to disrupt, and Super Polymerization completely waxes it. Chimera. You know, I used to think that Chimera was better than Branded. I still think it's a good deck. Put it in borderline. I no longer think that Chimera is the better deck, but it's still crazy good. This deck not only hand loops, it draws serious advantage and can be played with cards like Runix or even Branded or even both. The problem with this deck is that it loses harder to Ash than Branded. Crazy. Somebody asked, where would I put Cyber Dragon on the next tier list, my boys? Unfortunately, you just so happen to draw yourself on a meta tier list, so I'm gonna say a real challenge. One thing I will say about Cyber Dragon is that a lot of players are summoning monsters into the extra monster zone. That does give Cyber Dragon an opportunity to contact fuse with that monster off the board. That's huge. I would probably say that this deck is best regulated as a going second OTK type deck, but the problem is it's power crept right now. Dark World, my boy.
Welcome to the Dark World. We have cookies.
I'm gonna put Dark World in a real challenge. The good thing about Dark World is that hand loops are crazy, especially with the new Kin and Jin. The bad thing is that bestial monsters have came back with full force and everybody is playing Troll and Lockbird. My Exo stepsisters, I would actually put them in an experimental. I don't think that they're a bad deck, especially with bestial monsters being played a lot more. Anytime there's a lot more graveyard manipulation, Exo Sister has a chance. On top of that, it's also one of the better budget decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! It can be really good in the right player's hands. Fire Kings, my boy, just made their debut over the course of the weekend, and I already gotta put them in solid choice. My guy, Fire Kings is too strong. The good thing about Fire Kings is that this deck has an advantage resource engine that pretty much allows it to play forever.
I am no longer dead.
That's nice.
The bad thing is that it destroys cards on the field. That's actually a really bad thing. Decks like Unchained and Tier Limit are definitely licking their chops every time you see destruction. And also, sometimes your inboard is just Sacred Fire King Runix. That's it. I would say that Fluendaries is a borderline Yu-Gi-Oh deck. The reason why is that if you draw the matchup against a monster heavy deck, then it's a really good time for you. But if you go against a deck that's back row dependent, which some of the best decks in the game are, Sag. The Bird deck is one of the cheapest decks in the game though, so if you're looking for a competitive budget deck, that may be your answer. Now this little sarcophagus card stands for Horus Bisal. I would still say that this is a pretty powerful Yu-Gi-Oh deck. It's incredibly good at what it does, summons big monsters. The problem is with this deck is that sometimes you can't just summon big monsters and think you can get away with it. Unfortunately for Horus Bisal and Yu-Gi-Oh, it doesn't have a super oppressive board that prevents the opponent from playing. because that's fun. It's a fairly healthy deck where a lot of times in Yu-Gi-Oh! That's not going to get you over the hill. I really want to say that Inferno is experimental. That's how bad it is when regular players play it. But if you get a player that actually knows what they're doing, this deck is crazy good. Inferno is probably one of the hardest decks to play in Yu-Gi-Oh! But also is one of the most unfair. It's a reason why players are playing Nibiru to Primal Being and Droll Lockbird. It's really to stop combo decks like this. When it goes off, it's crazy. The bad thing about the game is that players are playing Nibiru to Primal Being and Droll Lockbird. Castira actually made a top over the weekend. That's crazy. This is a solid Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. I'm gonna put it in borderline as well. It's still pretty good at going second. And remember, Castira Fenrir is one of the most dangerous cards in the game. When you can back that up with cards like Castira Birth to keep recycling back your Castira monsters, this deck becomes a little unfair still. The only drawback to this deck, a Rise Heart is banned. Now, Labyrinth has jolted itself into one of the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Labyrinth has changed itself from being a trap-based Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck to more of a mid-range style, being able to proc the Labyrinth trap cards when you need them, but overall use the Labyrinth monsters to completely dominate the game. Labyrinth has consistently been at the top tables, but Manium has kind of disappeared. Right now, I would actually put Manium in experimental, and there's a couple of reasons why. The first thing, like I said before, a lot of players are playing Bestial monsters as well as Droll Lockbird. The Bestial monsters can actually come up by banishing Visa's cards in the graveyard, preventing you from summoning Astrolabe. The next big thing is that people are playing multiple effect negations plus Nibiru. Also, if you're going to play a combo deck, you're probably better off using your brain to play Inferno. They require the same amount of capacity, except Inferno is a more tried and true strategy. I don't think that Manium is completely down and out. I think it's a fairly good Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategy, but experimental is where it goes until players can figure out how to get it over this hump. Ironically, Marine Test did get to the top 64 cut, so I'm gonna put it in borderline. Marine Test is almost like Centurion. It has one card combos, which means the rest of your cards can be literally anything. Its one card combo just isn't as unfair as Centurion. But that doesn't mean Marine Test didn't come to play. It's actually a really good Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck in the right hands. I've noticed a lot of TCG players going back to Mathmech because of Master Duel, and I gotta say, them without Max C feels really good right now. Also, one Mathmech Circular, I think it's experimental. I don't think that this deck is bad, but losing that Mathmech Circular is huge to me. Circular enabled so many one-card combos and also pretty much couldn't be stopped. This card was ridiculous. It being limited to one does limit the potential of this deck. We also did see Makanko advance, but I'm not gonna lie, I'm not convinced. I think Makanko right now is really more about the player being a good player than the deck being a great deck. The entire deck of Makanko is fairly gimmicky. Its first turn play and its OTK combo. Good players do know how to play around this, which means you need an even better player to be able to win. Punk was a strategy that you guys suggested. I'm gonna put it as far as meta, real challenge. The biggest beef with Punk right now is that it doesn't make an oppressive inboard like some of these other decks. And it really sucks because Punk is actually a lot better than a real challenge. But when we're coming to talking about the best of the best, you're probably better off playing a different deck. I think Pearly's time has pretty much came in with the hits to Delicious Memory did mean a lot in the long run. I'm going to put it in borderline. It's still a pretty powerful deck, but with monsters like Underworld Goddess that exist, it's really hard to play. Rescue Ace, my boy. Rare, rare, rare. I'm in danger. Rescue Ace still is one of the best decks in the entire game. Unfortunately, it does not have a great matchup against Labyrinth because of Lady Labyrinth of the Silver Castle, but it has a great matchup against pretty much almost all of the other decks in the entire game. It is ridiculously unfair to be able to set 4 different cards from your deck and then still be able to summon powerful monsters like SP Little Knight and Better on the Floor. You guys wanted me to put Fluffle in a tier list, so here we are. Frighter is definitely a real challenge. This deck could be a powerful going second OTK style deck. The problem with that though is that you're going second. It's normally not a good idea in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now. Unfortunately, there are way too many unfair things that are happening in the game right now to prevent you from playing. It's just not really a solid strategy for the deck. I think Rika Plants are a solid choice Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. It does have some unfair things like Cactus Bouncer. It can also tribute your opponent's monsters when going second. I do fear though that now that Centurion, Labyrinth, and Rescue Ace are in the format, players are going to start playing more of Cosmic Cyclone, which will severely hurt this deck. I think Dragons are okay. Losing Chaos Space on the last Forbidden list put Rocket Dragon Link down bad. It's not like it's a terrible Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck, it's just waiting on the right support to propel it forward, in my opinion. Now, this Runic Fountain stands for Bestial Branded Runic. Yu-Gi-Oh! Players are twisting my arm right now to put this in solid choice. I think it could be a good deck. I do see the synergies with this strategy as a Yu-Gi-Oh deck. It does seem like Naturia before Naturia's Sacred Tree got hit, but personally, I'm not thoroughly convinced on this Yu-Gi-Oh deck. As far as the meta tier list goes, I'm going to put Solomon Great in that experimental card. Solomon Great's unfair card seems to be Rivalry of the Warlords or Gozen Match. Damn. Unfortunately, that's not good enough in today's Yu-Gi-Oh to be able to secure games. I also got to say Sword Soul is 100% experimental. This deck is power crept like all hell, and the last few supports for Sword Soul has not been incredible. The good thing about Sword Soul though is that it is like 1 or 2 cards away from being a dominant Yu-Gi-Oh deck though, so I think with the right support, it could go in the right direction. As your Vanquish Soul God, I think Vanquish Soul is pretty good. It is topped in almost every major event throughout the entire format, but the problem is it is not advanced deep into Top Cut like I would want it to. I think you can notice something about all of these decks in Borderline. They are really powerful, but what separates them from Solid Choice is that overall, these decks are a little bit too fair compared to some of the others. If you ask me, if we get rid of all of the unfair stuff, then all of the stuff in Borderline goes to Solid Choice. We get an even more diverse format. And that's not saying that any of these decks still can't be played unless you're real challenging, but essentially I'm saying leveling the playing field would be incredible. Now here comes a bold take. I actually think tier limits was overrepresented and it's not as good as players have been giving it credit. Definitely Borderline. I think a big part of this is because, like I said before, the bestial monsters and players are using DD Crow. Really hard for tier limit players to be able to play around that. Tier limit also doesn't do anything ridiculously unfair. It's a very solid Yu-Gi-Oh deck now. It's just when you get hit by the Ishizu Miller cards, that's when things get really crazy. And that's pretty much luck based. Phantom Knight's 100% experimental. This deck is not bad by any stretch, but it doesn't have what it takes to be a great Yu-Gi-Oh deck and is a little bit power crept. Unchained is definitely one of the best decks in the game still. I do think that this deck was a little underrepresented, but once I think it balances out, Unchained has a pretty good matchup against Labyrinth, but Rescue Ace has a good matchup against Unchained. Rescue Ace does not have a great matchup against Labyrinth, and that's what keeps all 3 of these decks in check. They're all really powerful and do some ridiculous things, but overall, they're actually fairly healthy still for the most part. And lastly, because I put Vanquish Soul here twice, Zombie World. Yeah, my boy, you tried. A real challenge. The good thing about Zombie World is that it would completely destroy decks like Rika. It would actually annihilate decks like Inferno. The bad thing is that your deck is inconsistent as all hell. I actually really do enjoy talking about some of these older strategies, even though they went into the real challenge. It's actually a little bit of a refresher. And that's all that I have for my meta tier list, guys. Let me know, what do you guys think? Is there something that I put a little bit too high or too low? Be sure to post in a pinned comment if you think I'm missing a particular strategy. And also be sure to check out these other videos so I can catch you on the next one.